So this video is a sequel to my previous video about my ancestry DNA results. So this is a table that I've created comparing my results at various times from ancestry DNA. When I created my last video, I think I had the first 4 of these, but now I have a 5th one. But you'll see that their estimates are fairly consistent. There was European Jewish, 46%, 50%, 46%, 46%, 46%. Then in my first analysis, they had England, Wales, and Northern Europe, 45%. Then they changed over to having Germanic Europe be separate, so that lowered the first category, and I ended up with 36%, 39%, 39%, 41% England, Wales, and Northwestern Europe. And then the Germanic Europe, which wasn't in the first estimate, was 5%, 2%, 2%, 3%, which sort of made up the difference. Then there was Ireland and Scotland at first, and that was 6%, 7%. And then in September 2020, they made it Ireland alone. So that was 7%, 10%, 7%. And the 10% Ireland alone really surprised me in the last video. But then there was Sweden, which was pretty consistently 3%, 2%, 3%, 3%, except in the last results that I got, they added and Denmark, Sweden and Denmark. I don't know why they did that, but it's still about the same percentage. Now, in my last video, I mentioned that I was trying to find relatives of my paternal grandmother, and nothing had come up in ancestry DNA. So people suggested that I might want to try myheritage.com. And the results were very surprising to me. So you'll see it starts out sort of the same, 43.3% Ashkenazi Jewish, and then 32.2% English, which was interesting because they didn't try to say England, Wales, Northwestern Europe. They said English, which is really what I would have expected from what my mother had told me about her ancestry and what my cousin Tommy had done in terms of his genealogy research. And then the third result, 17.8% Iberian. What? You know, my dad, clearly the 43.3% Ashkenazi Jewish. My mom, her ancestors lived in the northeastern part of the United States since colonial times. My cousin, who researched all of our ancestors on that side of the family and memorized 4,000 ancestors, didn't find anyone who was anything other than British Isles. And Iberians certainly never came up. And if you look at this, and if you total the Scandinavian, which is up to 6.7% here, it looks like my dad would have been Jewish and Scandinavian, because that would add up to 50%. And it looks like my mom would have been English and Iberian. Now, that didn't compute at all, but that would have added up to 50%. So this is a picture of my mom as a toddler. You can see she had blonde hair, which later turned dark. She also had blue eyes. And I think there wasn't a whole lot to indicate that she wasn't a typical waspy kid, except I think if you look at this picture of her, which is about 1975, I believe, maybe you can see that she had slightly olive skin. I remember always being sort of puzzled about that because you think of British people as having this really fair, fragile skin, and that was not my mom's case. She did not sunburn easily. It wasn't a really dark skin, but it definitely wasn't super fair either. Now, the ancestry DNA doesn't show any recent Spanish ancestry, so I don't really think that my grandmother had an affair with some Spaniard, but I think there might be something historical here. I should have been doing this landscape from the start. Portrait wasn't right. Anyway, I remember hearing that there were a lot of people who were referred to as, quote, black, unquote, Irish. That meant that they had dark hair, but they weren't really black-skinned people. But it was widely speculated that those dark-haired Irish people descended from sailors who managed to escape from the sinking of the Spanish Armada. When was that? Back in the 15th century, maybe? And maybe my mother was a descendant of one of those sailors. And maybe that's why she came up with having so much Irish ancestry, when maybe it wasn't really all Irish ancestry. Maybe it was surviving Spanish sailors. And maybe, although this hasn't been widely reported, maybe some of those sailors ended up in England. Maybe they didn't all end up in Ireland. Now, another interesting difference between the ancestry DNA results and the MyHeritage results had to do with the sort of people that they identified as distant cousins. There were a lot of people who I had like 1% DNA in common with in both sets of results. But in ancestry DNA, those people were predominantly in the United States, and they mostly had WASPy names, namely people from my mother's family. And with the MyHeritage, those people were mostly in Europe, and they mostly had Jewish names, therefore members of my father's family. And possibly some of them are from the family of my paternal grandmother. But I haven't had enough time to really pursue that. Although I still would like to find out whether the BRCA2 mutation that I have that caused my cancer came from my paternal grandfather's side, which I sort of suspect, or my paternal grandmother's side. And I would like to know if there are people who need to be warned. So I'm noticing that I'm tending to cut off my chin when I do these videos, and I probably should do them over, but I'm not going to, probably too lazy. But I know there's a lot more that I need to do here, and of course I always have trouble prioritizing time. And here it is December, and I've been meaning to do this video since I got the MyHeritage results in September. Anyway, better late than never.